Hey guys, tonight we begin in the quiet, ordinary stillness of a neighborhood park just after rain. The grass clings to your shoes, damp and uneven. Trees creak, ducks quack somewhere off-screen, and ahead there's a small pond, shallow, quiet, still. But in that stillness, something moves. A splash, a gasp. A child flails, barely visible beneath the surface. There's no one else here, just you. And in that instant, a thought rises. Not in words, but as a sharp, unspeakable force. You have to help. It's not logical. It's not rehearsed. It's just there. But what is that exactly? Is it instinct, evolution, social conditioning? Or is it a whisper from something higher, something divine? You didn't sign a contract agreeing to save children. No law demands it. And yet, here you are, feet moving. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and the local time. Let's see who's up late contemplating existence. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wade into a question as old as consciousness. Where does morality come from? Because that thing in your chest, that internal siren that screams when you see cruelty or injustice, it didn't come with a label. And depending on who you ask, it either proves God exists or proves we don't need one. This is the crux of the moral argument for God's existence. Not just that good and evil are real, but that their very reality requires a higher source. Otherwise, we're just making up rules in the sandbox, hoping everyone plays nice. Torturing a child, betraying a friend, enslaving a people, all might feel wrong, but without an absolute source, are they truly wrong? Historically, this idea has been used by everyone from medieval theologians to modern apologists. Thomas Aquinas gave it a Latin glow. C.S. Lewis made it palatable with tea and British charm. But the skeleton is the same. Real moral obligations must come from a real moral lawgiver. And yet, here's where it gets uncomfortable. Because you've met plenty of good people who don't believe in God, and maybe even more religious ones who don't act very moral. So how does that square? You remember your high school ethics teacher, Mr. Barnett, corduroy everything, who once said, if God commands what's good, is it good because he commands it? Or does he command it because it's good? Then he just sipped his coffee and let the room go awkwardly silent. That's a version of what philosophers call the Euthyphro dilemma, and we'll wander into its weeds soon enough. For now, back to that pond. You reach the child, pull them out, heart racing. They sob. You check for bruises. Then, when the ambulance pulls away and the adrenaline fades, you're left with a quiet question echoing in your head. Why did I do that? If you're like most people, the answer isn't complicated. You just had to. But had to according to what? Not survival. Not rational payoff. You didn't know if anyone was watching.
No viral TikTok glory.
Just you, the water, and a primal, almost sacred compulsion. That compulsion is what tonight is really about. Because whether you think it's written into the fabric of the universe by a benevolent creator, or simply hard-coded by evolution to help apes cooperate better, it feels real. Morality has a weight, a gravity. Even Hitler agreed, which is weirdly important, because even the worst people tend to justify their actions using moral language. No one says, I did it because I'm evil. They say, I did it for justice, or to protect my people, or to stop a greater harm. It's like our brains have to wrap evil in the language of good. And that tells you something profound. Even when we twist it, we seem to believe morality is real, not just a social invention like driving on the right side of the road. If it were, genocide would just be a really poor cultural choice. But here's the twist. That same moral pull that urges you to save a drowning child, it also screams when you watch a video of someone beating their dog, or ignoring a homeless person, or laughing at cruelty. And those reactions, gut-level, universal, are what theists point to and say, see, there's the fingerprint of God. The atheist counters. Nope, that's just evolution, a survival mechanism. Cooperation helps genes win. And you're caught in the middle, holding the dripping jacket of a child you just saved. wondering who's right. Historians still argue whether early Homo sapiens had moral instincts before they had language, or whether morality bloomed only with storytelling, when tribes could share tales of heroism and betrayal. What we do know, humans are the only animals that seem to judge each other morally, not just practically. A wolf doesn't scold another for being unfair. A dolphin doesn't hold a grudge for selfishness. But humans? We'll cancel each other over lunchroom gossip. Morality matters to us, deeply, strangely. There's even a quirky theory from 19th century theologian John Henry Newman that says this internal voice, the one that tells you to help or feel shame, isn't metaphorical. He claimed it was the literal voice of God, dimmed by time but never fully silenced, like a distant radio station barely coming through static. And maybe that's romantic nonsense, or maybe it's true, but either way, that little voice is loud tonight. And as you dry your hands and look back at that quiet pond, a thought stirs. What if every moment like this, every gut feeling of right and wrong, is a clue, a breadcrumb, a moral compass pointing not north, but upward? Whether you're a believer or not, the question is now yours to carry. Because now that you've acted, now that you've done the good, you're already part of the debate. You wake up the next morning still thinking about the pond. There's toast on your plate, coffee in your hand, a to-do list staring you down. But beneath all that, somewhere behind the errands and emails, your mind keeps looping back. You didn't choose to care about that child. You just did. And that weird, reflexive surge of moral urgency still buzzes under your skin like a mild electric current. So where did it come from? If you listen to most evolutionary biologists, they'll smile gently and say, oh, that's just your brain doing what it was built to do. See, for hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors weren't debating metaethics over lattes. They were dodging predators, chasing calories, and trying not to be exiled from their little tribes of hairless apes. In that world, morality wasn't philosophy, it was survival software. You cooperate, you live. You betray, you get speared. So the theory goes, our sense of right and wrong evolved as an emotional GPS, pointing us toward behaviors that helped our ancestors thrive. Compassion for children boosts the odds they survive and pass on genes. Anger at cheaters keeps freeloaders in check. Empathy, guilt, outrage, all just chemical tools to keep the group together and functional. And sure, that explains a lot. But if you're starting to feel like you're just a moral marionette being yanked around by ancient impulses, you're not alone. This view is often called moral naturalism, and it's got plenty of fans. It doesn't need a god, a soul, or anything supernatural, just neurons, hormones, and a few million years of natural selection. Darwin himself hinted at this, noting that animals like dogs already show proto-moral traits like loyalty and guilt. But here's where things get slippery. If morality evolved, then doesn't that mean it's relative? Not wrong to abandon a child, just maladaptive? If your brain had evolved differently, would murder feel noble? That question keeps a lot of philosophers up at night, especially after whiskey, because while evolution might explain why you feel moral urges, it doesn't prove that those urges correspond to anything real. It's like being born with a compass, great for navigation but useless if there's no magnetic north. Historians still argue whether early societies used moral codes to reflect religious belief or to control group behavior. Hammurabi's code, for example, predates the Bible but includes strikingly familiar laws about theft, murder, and justice. Was that God's voice, or just a king's clever way to keep people from stabbing each other over goats? And what about cultures that evolved with wildly different moral norms? Ancient Sparta left weak babies on rocks. Aztecs tore hearts from chests as divine offerings. Even today, what counts as moral in one country might get you jailed in another. So then, what are we really dealing with?
Universal morality?
Or just elaborate tribal etiquette? Quirky side note. In the 1970s, an anthropologist named Napoleon Chagnon studied the Yanomami tribe in the Amazon. He was shocked to find that acts we'd consider vicious, like raiding neighboring villages, were treated as heroic and honorable. Morality, it seems, wore camouflage and carried a spear. But even if morality is adaptive, does that make it less meaningful? You've probably felt a surge of righteousness when standing up for someone, or crying at a protest, or even just refusing to laugh at a cruel joke. In those moments, it doesn't feel like you're just obeying instinct. It feels like you're aligning with something true, something that ought to be, whether or not it helps your DNA. That's where the debate cracks wide open. Because if all our moral intuitions are just survival tools, can we trust them to reveal any objective truths? That's what's called the reliability challenge. It's like trusting a used car salesman who's only incentivized to make the sale, not to tell the truth. One philosopher compared it to social media algorithms. Platforms evolve to maximize engagement, not truth. So if a lie gets more clicks, the algorithm favors the lie. Now imagine your moral intuitions are like that, shaped not for truth but utility. Creepy, right? And yet, we still feel them, even when they hurt us, even when we sacrifice, lose, or suffer because of them. Picture this: a soldier throwing themselves on a grenade, an aid worker staying in a war zone, a whistleblower risking prison to expose corruption. These aren't selfish gene-boosting moves. They're acts that defy simple evolutionary logic. And when you witness them, you don't think, "Ah yes, useful behavior for group cohesion." You think, "That's right, that's good." Which leads some to believe evolution can't be the full story. Maybe it's the hardware, sure. But maybe morality also needs software, something transcendent, guiding those instincts towards something more. Believers say that more is God, a divine source.
Amoral architect.
Evolution builds the radio. God broadcasts the signal. Skeptics counter. That's just anthropomorphizing your feelings, like seeing faces in clouds or hearing messages in static. Our brains are storytelling machines. They create patterns, project meanings, and build narratives. Maybe that inner moral voice isn't divine. Maybe it's just neurons echoing through a skull. You lean back in your chair, staring at the ceiling, suddenly unsure whether you're a noble soul or a very polite primate. And that's the tension, isn't it? You want your sense of justice to mean something, to matter beyond biology. But you also want to understand where it comes from, and whether it's just a lucky accident of neural wiring. The truth is, no one knows for sure. But you're not alone in the wondering. Because if morality is real and not just useful, then you've got to ask the next question: what anchors it? If not biology, then what? We'll need math, murder, and a whole lot of metaphysics. But for now, just let the thought settle. Your brain may have evolved to care. But your heart? That's another story entirely. You're walking through the cereal aisle when it hits you. Not a moral epiphany, just a shopping cart. Some kid wasn't looking. You both laugh awkwardly. No harm done. But then you think, what if they had done it on purpose? Suddenly, it's not funny anymore. Because intent changes everything. And that's exactly where philosophy lives. In the tiny crack between what is and what ought to be. That's the battleground where people compare ethics to mathematics. Both feel universal. Both feel objective. Both feel true in a way that doesn't care whether you believe in them or not. 2 + 2 = 4. And if you're like most people, you also believe that torturing a child for fun is wrong, even if everyone around you said otherwise. That's not just preference. That's not just culture. That's something else. That's a moral fact, or at least that's the claim. So now, here's the question. If moral facts are real, do they need a moral fact maker? Religious thinkers will tell you yes. That just like 2 + 2 = 4 reflects an abstract truth of logic. Murder is wrong reflects something baked into the fabric of the universe, because God is goodness itself. Not because he says so, but because his very nature is the standard. But here's where it gets wild. Some philosophers argue that mathematical and moral truths are both independent, that they just exist, floating out there waiting to be discovered, not created by anyone, not even God. It's called non-theistic moral realism, and yes, it sounds like something you'd whisper to a grad student in a candlelit seminar room. But stick with it. This view says moral truths are like gravity. They're part of the structure of reality. No one voted them in.
No devain decree.
They just are. So, when you feel in your bones that cruelty is wrong, you're not channeling God, you're just perceiving a truth that's as real as math. You might even picture morality like a hidden landscape, valleys of wrong, peaks of good, and your conscience is the GPS trying to navigate it. The question is, who built the map? And more importantly, who made your GPS? Historians still argue whether ancient Greek thinkers like Pythagoras or Plato truly believed moral truths were real in the same way numbers are. Plato sure sounded like he did. In his theory of forms, things like justice and goodness were perfect realities existing in some higher plane. Earthly stuff was just the blurry shadow. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and we still haven't settled it. Because here's the thing, math may describe what is, but morality tells us what we ought to do. That ought is a sticky, rebellious little word. It doesn't fit neatly into equations. 2 + 2 = 4. But that doesn't tell you whether you should donate to charity. That's called the is-ought problem. And it's been annoying people since David Hume threw it into the spotlight in the 1700s. Just because something is doesn't mean it should be. Just because lying gets you ahead doesn't mean it's okay. So how do we bridge the gap? Some thinkers try to sneak around it with logic. Others jump the canyon using God as a bridge. Still others say, don't cross it at all. It's a trap. Maybe the whole is-ought thing is a misdirection, like a philosophical optical illusion. Meanwhile, you're just trying to figure out if eating factory farm chicken is a moral failure or just Tuesday dinner. Let's take a break from the abstract and zoom in on a weird, real-world case. In 2013, a group of researchers discovered a region in the human brain, called the right temporoparietal junction, that lights up when you make moral judgments. Not when you think about laws. Not when you weigh outcomes. Just when you decide what's right or wrong. Here's the twist. By using magnets to disrupt this area, researchers could make people less sensitive to intentions. So, someone who accidentally poisoned a friend was judged just as bad as someone who did it on purpose. In other words, your brain chemistry affects your moral conclusions. Cue the existential dread. Because now you're not just wondering where morality comes from, you're wondering if it's even reliable. Like asking a pair of glitchy binoculars to find the North Star. What if we're all walking moral compasses that spin depending on sleep, blood sugar, and Twitter exposure? That's why some thinkers say we need more than intuition. We need reason, cold, hard logic. And sure, that helps. But logic alone can't tell you why murder feels different from bad arithmetic. Can't tell you why you weep at injustice. Or why you get goosebumps when someone stands up for a stranger. Math doesn't move you. Morality does. You remember a quote, maybe from Einstein, maybe misattributed. Historians still argue relativity applies to physics, not ethics. Whether he said it or not, the idea sticks. That maybe there is a kind of moral gravity. Invisible, constant, pulling you towards something higher. But now comes the skeptic's whisper. Isn't this just wishful thinking? It might be. The desire for moral truths to be real, to be more than moods, is strong. Almost religious in itself. Still, something nags at you. The Holocaust wasn't just inefficient. It wasn't non-optimal. It was wrong. In every time, every place, every universe. And if that's true, if there's even one unshakable moral fact, then we have to ask, what kind of world makes that possible? Maybe it's a world with a God. Or maybe it's just a world strange and deep enough to hold truths that no brain invented, but that every heart recognizes. You push your cart past the cereal. Wheaties. Frosted Flakes.
Moral dilemmas everywhere.
And somewhere, beneath the buzz of fluorescent lights and soft jazz radio, the debate goes on quietly, stubbornly, in every choice you make. You're staring at your phone, thumbs hovering above a reply. Someone's just posted a comment. Racist, cruel, and clearly meant to provoke. You feel that tight coil in your chest, that righteous pull to say something, anything. And even though you know it won't change their mind, even though you're exhausted and it's late and the internet is basically a landfill with emojis, something in you says, you should respond. You don't even like online debates. You're not trying to win, but you still feel the need to push back, to draw a line. Why? That question, why you feel morally obligated to act, even when no one's watching, is called the implementation problem, and it's been bothering philosophers like a pebble in the sock of every moral theory. Because it's one thing to believe that X is right and Y is wrong. It's another thing entirely to feel like you must do X, even when it's inconvenient, even when it hurts, even when nobody claps. So where does that must come from? Believers say it's simple: God, the divine, a higher authority that doesn't just suggest morality, it commands it, and not arbitrarily either. According to many theologians, God's very nature is goodness. Not like a good person, not like a heavenly Santa, but the literal source of all that we call good. It's not about fear of punishment or hope of reward. It's about alignment, living according to the design you were made for, like a compass needle snapping north. But the atheist side asks a fair question. Why should I obey, even if God exists? If God's authority is based on power, like, I made you, so obey me, that feels more like tyranny than truth. And if his authority is based on his goodness, then doesn't that mean goodness exists independently of him? That's the tension. Because even if morality has a divine source, you still have to explain why we should listen. What gives God moral authority, not just cosmic muscle? Meanwhile, secular thinkers try to ground obligation elsewhere. Some say it comes from rational coherence, that when you understand others suffer like you do, and you see no good reason to privilege yourself, you're compelled, by logic, not law, to treat others fairly. That sounds lovely in theory, but we both know how often people understand what's right and just don't care. You remember reading about a Nazi officer who helped plan deportations by day and listened to Mozart by night. He knew, but it didn't matter. Knowledge isn't motivation. And that's the core of the implementation problem. How do you get from "that's wrong" to "I won't do it"? Or even harder, from "that's right" to "I'll do it, even if it costs me"? Historians still argue whether ancient Stoics like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius successfully solved this. They believed virtue was its own reward, and that living according to reason was the highest good. But their critics noted, it's easier to love reason when you're a Roman emperor with a personal slave whispering "memento mori" in your ear. So, what keeps you going? Why do you return the shopping cart? Why do you hold your tongue when it would feel better to lash out? Why do you donate to charities where you'll never meet the recipients? Some say it's empathy. Others say it's social conditioning. But sometimes you feel the obligation rise up inside you before you've had time to calculate. And that makes it feel less like a product and more like a presence. There's a theory from philosopher Robert Adams called the sovereignty requirement. It says, for moral truths to be genuinely binding, they need an ultimate source, something or someone with legitimate authority. Like laws need lawmakers, morality needs a moral sovereign. And Adams says, that's God. Not because he enforces with thunderbolts, but because he is the good. Like H2O is water, goodness is God. So when you feel a moral imperative, you're not obeying an external law. You're responding to reality itself, like recognizing beauty or tasting salt. It's just there. But that leads right into the atheist critique. If I can recognize moral truth without God, if I can feel obligation without a sermon, then doesn't that mean the authority lies in reason and empathy, not the divine? And here's where it gets personal. Because maybe the question isn't, where does obligation come from? Maybe it's, why do you keep answering it, even when it hurts? You think of moments where you've done the right thing and paid a price, told the truth and lost the job, stood up for someone and got shut out, forgave someone who never said sorry. These weren't logic games. They weren't survival strategies. They were acts that felt necessary, like moral gravity pulling you to do what's right, even when it costs everything. There's an old Quaker saying, let your life speak, but maybe your life already is speaking, through those tiny acts of stubborn goodness, through your refusal to look away, through the ache you feel when injustice wins. And maybe that ache is the loudest argument of all. Quirky side note. In the 1600s, philosopher Blaise Pascal argued that your very unease, your longing for justice, your grief over cruelty, is evidence of the divine. He called it the God-shaped vacuum, a space that can't be filled by logic or instinct alone. Whether you buy that or not, the feeling remains. Because even when you don't believe in a higher power, you still feel the tug of something higher. Some part of you still acts like moral truths are real, even sacred. So tonight, when you see another cruel comment, or another injustice trending, or another quiet chance to be kind when no one's watching, you'll probably feel it again. That should. That must. And whether you call it God, conscience, or something nameless, you answer. Not because you're perfect, not because it makes sense, but because something in you still wants to rise. You're standing at the edge of a paradox. You've followed the trail this far, morality feels real, binding, and somehow bigger than you. You feel its weight even when it's inconvenient, even when it goes against instinct or culture. And that naturally leads to the idea that maybe it comes from something even bigger. Enter the God-goodness paradox, otherwise known as the Euthyphro dilemma, a philosophical trap that's been tripping people up since Socrates was wearing sandals. Here's the classic form. Is something good because God commands it, or does God command it because it's good? Either answer leads somewhere weird. If something is good because God commands it, then morality becomes arbitrary. God could have just as easily declared lying or murder to be virtuous, and we'd have to salute and go along with it. That makes morality feel less like truth and more like celestial policy. On the other hand, if God commands something because it's already good, then goodness exists independently of God, which makes him seem, well, unnecessary to the system, like a manager taking credit for a team project that's already running smoothly. This isn't just a brainy gotcha. It hits at the heart of what believers want to claim, that God is goodness itself, not just its mouthpiece. To escape the trap, some theologians get clever. They say God doesn't decide what is good, nor does he follow it. Instead, goodness is rooted in his very nature. It's not arbitrary. It's not external. It's intrinsic, kind of like how water doesn't choose to be wet. It just is. This move reframes the debate. It avoids divine whim and preserves God's centrality. If God is goodness itself, then commands like love your neighbor don't come from policy. They come from the core of what God is. But not everyone's satisfied. Skeptics argue this God equals goodness idea is just kicking the can. What does it even mean to say a being is goodness? How do you measure that? Is it moral because he says so? Or are we back to square one with a fancy philosophical rebrand? Historians still argue whether medieval thinkers like Aquinas truly solved the dilemma or just draped it in elegant Latin. He wrote that God's will and goodness are perfectly united, but then spent paragraphs parsing out exceptions that made the whole thing feel less than seamless. And honestly, your head starts spinning, because you don't want to live in a universe where morality is random. But you also don't want to pretend it's obvious how God's nature makes things good. So maybe you step back and look at this differently. Let's try a thought experiment. Imagine a world where God exists, but he's cruel. Not like sends locusts once a decade cruel, but delighting in pain, rewarding betrayal, and encouraging injustice. Could you still call him good? Would you obey? If the answer is no, if you recoil at the idea of worshiping such a being, then it suggests your moral compass isn't just wired to follow power. It's aiming at something else. And that something else, where did that come from? Maybe morality is like music. You don't invent it. You don't always understand it. But you hear a melody in the dark, and you know when it's in tune. Maybe God, if he exists, isn't the composer but the melody itself. That deep, harmonious hum that resonates through conscience and cosmos alike. There's a fringe theory out there, quirky and kind of beautiful, that suggests morality is the language of the divine. Not words, not thunderclaps, just those moments of unshakable clarity when you know what's right. Like the moment you comfort someone you could have ignored, or the moment you say no when yes would be easier, or the moment you stay silent when speaking would wound. Those aren't divine commands. They're divine chords, resonances, not because a voice from the sky told you what to do, but because something deep inside you sings when you get it right. Still, the atheist reply comes back. Why invoke a God at all? Isn't it cleaner, simpler to say we evolved this moral sense? That we refined it through trial and error? That we built ethical systems because it made life better, safer, fairer? And honestly, there's strength in that argument. Simplicity matters. As the principle of Occam's razor goes, the simplest explanation that fits all the facts is usually the best. But simplicity isn't the only value. Sometimes the deeper, messier explanation gets closer to the mystery. Sometimes, when you're standing in the ruins of something sacred, like a broken promise, or a public betrayal, or a single innocent grave, you don't want simplicity. You want something true. You think of the civil rights leaders who invoked God's justice while facing down hoses and hatred. You think of the abolitionists who clung to moral truth even when their churches stayed silent. You think of kids who believe in fairness before they can spell it. And you wonder, if morality is just survival instinct dressed in poetry, why does it break your heart? Because that ache you feel, that deep, involuntary reaction to cruelty, isn't strategic. It's sacred. And maybe sacredness, too, is real. So you return again to the question, is God the source of goodness, or its reflection? Are you obeying a divine being, or tuning into something that transcends even divinity? You still don't know, but you do know this. The fact that you're still asking, that's part of the answer. You're back at that familiar intersection. Logic says, wait. Your gut says, go. There's a woman standing by the crosswalk. She's juggling a stroller, grocery bags, and a toddler melting down like a popsicle in July. You could keep walking. Everyone else is. But something in you hesitates. You step forward. You hold the door. Offer to carry a bag. Smile awkwardly as the toddler screams directly into your soul. You didn't plan this. There's no personal benefit. And yet it feels unmistakably like the right thing to do. That tension between instinct and reason, between heart and head, is the playground of every ethicist from Aristotle to Kant. It's also the stage for one of the most iconic and weirdly entertaining moral puzzles of all time. The trolley problem. Here's the scene. A runaway trolley is speeding down the tracks toward 5 people. You're standing by a lever. If you pull it, the trolley switches tracks, but it'll kill one person on that side instead. Do you pull the lever? And before you answer, here's the kicker. In another version, there's no lever. Just a bridge. A large man is standing next to you. If you push him off, his body stops the trolley and saves the 5. Do you do it? Same math. Same stakes. Totally different vibes. Why? Because your moral instincts don't always line up with your logical conclusions. Evolution gave you gut-level responses to protect the tribe. But modern ethics demands abstract reasoning, which means you often end up with 2 competing answers in your head, and no satisfying way to reconcile them. This clash between emotion and calculation is what makes moral decision-making such a mess. And here's where philosophers like to show off. Utilitarians, like Jeremy Bentham, say it's simple. Maximize happiness. Save the 5, sacrifice the 1. Morality is math. But deontologists like Kant say nope, some actions are always wrong, no matter the outcome. Pushing a man off a bridge is murder, and morality isn't about results, it's about rules. So who's right? Historians still argue whether Kant's categorical imperative is brilliant or just baffling. His rule, act only according to that maxim you would will to be a universal law, sounds noble until you try applying it to real life and realize you're stuck in an episode of The Good Place. Meanwhile, neuroscience wades in with brain scans and smug certainty. When people think about the trolley problem, different parts of their brain light up depending on whether they're processing it emotionally or logically. The lever scenario activates analytical regions. The push the man scenario, emotional regions, which means your moral decisions aren't made in a single place. They're cobbled together by a committee of instincts, feelings, memories, and syllogisms. Half courtroom, half gut punch. And that might explain why your moral code sometimes feels like it's glitching. You want to help, but not always. You believe in fairness. Until it costs you. You feel empathy, but only up to a point. Take this strange but real study. People are more likely to donate to a charity when shown a single child in need than when shown statistics about thousands. It's called the identifiable victim effect, and it proves something uncomfortable. Your compassion is not evenly distributed. So what do you do with that? Believers might say, this is evidence of a fallen nature, that your moral compass was once aligned, but now it spins erratically. And that's why you need divine help, not just to know what's right, but to want to do it consistently. Skeptics offer another take. You're not broken, you're human. Morality is messy because it evolved piecemeal, patchworked over millennia to balance survival with cooperation. The inconsistencies aren't flaws, they're features. Adaptive glitches in a system built for caves, not concrete. But even if that's true, the feeling remains. Because when you save a child, or feed a stranger, or say sorry when you could have made excuses, it doesn't feel like biology. It feels like meaning. And sometimes, the biggest clues aren't in philosophical treatises. They're in your daily life. Like when you hesitate before gossiping. Like when you tip extra for kindness. Like when you walk away from vengeance because something inside whispers, be better. There's a story, maybe apocryphal, maybe real, historians still bicker, about the Dalai Lama being asked how he makes moral decisions. He supposedly smiled and said, "I just try not to hurt anyone. And if I can, I try to help. No trolley problems. No Greek syllogisms. Just a human heart choosing compassion over convenience." Quirky footnote. There's a real-life version of the trolley problem that plays out every day. It's called triage. In ERs, battlefield tents, and disaster zones, doctors must decide who to treat first, often knowing someone else will die as a result. It's messy, it's heartbreaking, and it's not solved with a lever. So maybe morality isn't about perfect answers. Maybe it's about showing up anyway, flawed, uncertain, but still trying to choose what's right. You won't always get it right. You'll hesitate, rationalize, regret. But the fact that you wrestle with the question, that matters. Because morality isn't just about outcomes or principles or synapses. It's about you, sitting on the train, standing at the crosswalk, hovering over the comment button, wondering who you want to be. And that wondering, that quiet, relentless wondering, it might be the most human and most sacred thing you do. You're scrolling through news headlines, and one story stops you cold. A nurse in New York, working back-to-back shifts during the pandemic, contracts the virus and dies. She had been treating patients long after her scheduled hours. Voluntarily.
No spotlight. No medals.
Just compassion in scrubs. You sit back and think, why would anyone do that? It wasn't genetic self-interest. She didn't know these patients. There was no paycheck worth dying for. This wasn't just moral behavior, it was moral sacrifice. And it stings in a different part of your brain. The part that whispers you could be better. This kind of behavior seems to contradict the survival of the fittest narrative. Sure, evolutionary psychologists will tell you cooperation helps the group survive, and sometimes the group helps you back. But what about when it doesn't? What about soldiers jumping on grenades to save their squad? Whistleblowers who lose everything to speak a truth no one wants to hear? Strangers running into burning buildings for people they'll never meet again? These aren't useful shortcuts to reproductive success. These are moral outliers. Beautiful, terrifying, human. So where does this moral courage come from? Believers often say it's divine image-bearing, that you, like every other person, were made in the likeness of a moral God, and that likeness surfaces in moments of radical goodness. You don't do it because you want something. You do it because your soul knows. Skeptics reply, morality doesn't need a mystical origin to be powerful. It's enough to say that humans, through empathy and shared identity, evolve moral frameworks that eventually include even strangers. Think of Peter Singer's expanding circle. We start by caring for kin, then clan, then country, and, with enough effort, for everyone. Still, that doesn't fully explain the intensity. Why the pain when we see injustice? Why the grief when we hear about cruelty oceans away? Why the guilt for things we didn't even do? Historians still argue whether ancient religions or secular moral codes first encouraged self-sacrifice. The code of Bushido elevated honor above life. Early Christian martyrs went singing to their deaths. But is this morality or just ideology? You think of 9/11 responders running into chaos, of parents donating kidneys to strangers, of Malala standing against the Taliban with a schoolgirl's voice. And then you remember something smaller. The time you helped a friend move on your only day off. You didn't want to.
No glory.
Just heavy furniture and sore arms. But you did it. And afterward you felt, right? That quiet sense of alignment. That this is what I was meant to do it lingers long after the pain fades. It's like your conscience throws a party for you that your ego isn't invited to. So maybe morality isn't always rational. Maybe it's formational, something that shapes who you are, not just what you do. Philosopher Iris Murdoch called this the unselfing power of goodness. That when you act morally, you momentarily escape the prison of your own desires. You look outward. You become real. There's a quirky tidbit about ants. In certain species, a worker ant will spontaneously explode. Yes, explode, to block a predator from reaching the colony. Is that heroism? No. It's programming. Instinctual. Unquestioned. But you get to choose. And the very fact that you struggle with the choice, weigh it, agonize, hesitate, means something. You're not just reacting. You're deliberating. That gap between impulse and action, that's where ethics lives. You also wrestle with failure. You remember the times you didn't act, the silent bystander moments, the easy exits, the apologies you rehearsed and never gave. And yet, you still care. The guilt hurts, but it also proves something survived. That your moral compass, while battered, still spins. Maybe not perfectly, but faithfully. Believers would say that compass points toward God. That even your failures speak to a deeper moral standard, one that exists outside of culture or convenience. Skeptics might say it's your identity, formed by values, shaped by family, reinforced by stories of who you want to be. And somewhere in between lies the possibility that morality is about becoming, not just behaving. Quirky side story. In 1940, a French village called Le Chambon-sur-Lignon quietly hid thousands of Jewish refugees from Nazi forces. They risked their lives, not for medals or ideology, but because, as one pastor said, "We do not know what a Jew is. We only know people." They didn't theorize. They didn't wait for orders. They just acted. And so do you, in small ways, when you stay up with a grieving friend, when you tell a child the truth gently, when you give up your seat, your time, your comfort. Those choices may not save the world, but they save something in you, because you're not just here to survive. You're here to mean something. And every time you choose kindness over gain, compassion over safety, justice over silence, you get a little closer to who you were meant to be, whatever that means. Whoever wrote the blueprint, whether anyone did at all. You're thumbing through an old history book, maybe in a library, maybe just on your phone, and you pause on a timeline chart. Slavery, suffrage, segregation, marriage equality. Each milestone is a moment when someone said, "We were wrong." A shift, a rupture, a revelation. It's strange, isn't it? We look back and say, how could they not see it? But then you wonder, what are we blind to now? That's the haunting beauty of moral progress. The idea that slowly, painfully, humanity becomes more just. Not always, not cleanly, but forward. And if that's true, it raises a massive question. Where is morality coming from, us or something beyond us? Let's set the scene. Once upon a time, the world thought slavery was fine. In many places, it was law. It was normal. And then, over decades, centuries, it became unthinkable. Not just impractical. Not just unfashionable. Wrong. Same with women voting. Same with children working in coal mines. Same with segregation, genocide, and now, for many, animal rights and environmental justice. These shifts aren't just about policy, they're about values. Something changed in how we see, in what we accept. And the big question is, did we discover those values? Or invent them? Believers often frame moral progress as the gradual unveiling of a fixed divine truth. Like cleaning the glass on a stained glass window, each generation wipes a little more grime away and sees more of the design. Skeptics, meanwhile, see it as the product of reflection, empathy, and reason. That we, as social beings, slowly outgrow our biases, expand our circle of concern, and redraw the moral map with each generation. You might remember that Peter Singer expanding circle theory from earlier. The idea is simple: we naturally care about ourselves first, then our family, then our community. But with effort and a good ethics professor or two, we learn to extend care to strangers, then other cultures, and eventually even animals and ecosystems. Sounds lovely, but is it always progress? Historians still argue whether moral change always leads upward or just sideways. Yes, we abolished slavery, but we built mass incarceration. Yes, we expanded voting rights, but we still gerrymander and suppress. Yes, we care about global suffering, but we scroll past it every day. So maybe it's not a staircase. Maybe it's a spiral. We circle back, seeing old failures in new ways. You think of statues being torn down, not just to erase the past, but to confront it. You think of laws changing slowly, often long after people's hearts have already shifted. And you wonder, is this progress or just rebranding? Quirky detour. In ancient Persia, it was common for kings to carve declarations of justice into stone pillars and place them along roads. They believed laws weren't just commands, they were reflections of divine order. Breaking them was not only illegal, it was cosmically destabilizing. Compare that to now, we argue morality on talk shows, on Twitter, in memes. We treat ethics like debate club, but the stakes are still cosmic. Because every moral shift comes with backlash. Every gain is met with a growl. You've seen it. Every time a new group demands rights, someone else claims those rights threaten theirs. Progress is rarely peaceful. It's noisy, uncomfortable, full of uncertainty. And yet, it keeps happening. Why? Maybe because people change. But more importantly, generations die. That sounds grim, but it's true. Each wave of new humans enters a slightly more just world. Your great-grandparents may have seen interracial marriage as scandalous. You see it as Tuesday. The moral frame shifts. Not because someone held a vote on what's really right, but because the world moved and we moved with it. So again, did morality change? Or did we just finally see it clearly? Believers might say, God's truth never changed. We just stopped making excuses. Skeptics might say we made better excuses. And somewhere between cynicism and hope lies the truth. We grow. Slowly. Clumsily. But we grow. There's a moment in every generation when a kid looks at a rule and says, "That's dumb." And if enough people agree, the rule crumbles. That's how we got child labor laws. That's how we got civil rights. That's how we got movements that began in whispers and ended in marble monuments. But progress is fragile, can reverse. What's gained can be lost. And every generation must decide what it's willing to fight for and what it's willing to change. Because morality doesn't live in books or commandments or constitutions. It lives in you, in how you treat the delivery driver, in how you speak when no one's listening, in the ideas you pass on to your kids, not by lecture but by example. Progress isn't a guarantee. It's a choice. One made over and over by people who look at the world and say, we can do better. And when you make that choice quietly, daily, imperfectly, you're not just a bystander in the moral story. You're the author. You're flipping through late-night channels or maybe scrolling YouTube again, and you land on one of those heated debates. Two people in suits. Raised voices. Morality, justice, divine law, something about objective truth. It's hard to keep up. But then one of them says something that sticks. Without God, there's no reason to believe in right and wrong. You pause. That sounds serious. Welcome to the beating heart of divine command theory, the belief that morality is not just backed by God, but actually depends on God to exist at all.
No deity, no duties. No haben, no oath.
To believers, this is comforting. Morality is anchored, stable, not floating in the breeze of culture or opinion. It's like a constitution written in the sky, timeless, unbreakable, enforced by the ultimate authority. But if that gives you the warm fuzzies, you might want to buckle up. Because divine command theory also comes with a suitcase full of problems. Let's open it. First up, arbitrariness. If good is whatever God commands, then God could command anything and it would be good. Torture? Genocide? Pineapple on pizza? Now, defenders of the theory will say, no, God would never do that. His nature is good. But skeptics reply, says who? If we use our own sense of goodness to judge God's commands, then we're still relying on a standard outside of God. One we already believe in, which kind of defeats the point. Then there's the issue of moral independence. Most people, even devout believers, feel comfortable saying, that command doesn't seem moral, when looking at certain scriptures, like the ones about stoning disobedient children or punishing entire cities. If God is the moral source, who are we to question? And if we do question, doesn't that imply some sense of goodness apart from God? Historians still argue whether ancient Israelites saw divine law as absolute morality or just divine policy. The difference matters. If law is just a tool God uses, then goodness must sit even higher on the throne. But maybe you're not religious at all. Maybe you're thinking, okay, but even if I don't believe in God, I still feel like some things are just wrong. That's where divine command theory draws a hard line. It says your feelings are nice, but without God, those intuitions are untethered. You're standing on a moral trampoline with no frame. Bounce all you like, there's no ought holding it up. Still, many modern ethicists push back. They argue that obligation can arise from reason, not revelation. That if we, as rational beings, want to live in a coherent, fair society, we're obligated to treat others with the same respect and dignity we expect for ourselves. Think Immanuel Kant. Think Christine Korsgaard. Think of the golden rule minus the beard in the clouds. And honestly, that works for a lot of people. But there's something divine command theory captures that abstract ethics can't quite touch: moral urgency. When you see someone kick a dog, you don't say, that violates a universalizable maxim. You say, that's wrong. Full stop. That kind of visceral, absolute language, it fits better in a worldview where right and wrong are grounded in something ultimate. Not opinion, not evolution, something eternal. Believers might say, you feel that way because you were made in God's image. Your conscience is His fingerprint. Skeptics might say, you feel that way because your brain evolved to keep the tribe functioning. And again, you're caught in the middle, holding a leash, watching a dog sniff a tree, wondering whether your outrage is sacred or just synaptic. There's also a question of enforcement. In legal systems, laws without consequences are often ignored. So what about divine law? If God is the moral lawgiver, does that mean hell is the punishment for disobedience? Some believers say yes, morality is serious business. Others soften the blow, saying divine justice is restorative, not punitive. Still, it raises uncomfortable questions. Is morality truly good if it's rooted in fear? Quirky note: in medieval Europe, people often equated sin with cosmic disorder. It wasn't just wrong, it messed up the entire universe. A lie could unbalance the heavens. That's one way to raise the stakes. But today, morality feels more grounded. Less about thunder and more about harm. You don't avoid stealing because lightning might strike. You avoid it because it hurts people, undermines trust, and erodes your soul, and maybe your Yelp rating. So here's the awkward question divine command theory forces you to ask. Would you still believe murder is wrong if God said it was right? If your answer is no, if you would push back even against heaven, then congratulations. You believe in moral truth apart from divine command. And if your answer is yes, well, now you have to defend a pretty uncomfortable God. That's the tension. God as source versus God as speaker. Morality as divine decree versus morality as divine reflection. You think of Martin Luther King Jr., who spoke often of the moral arc of the universe, bending toward justice. He didn't mean that morality floats in space. He meant that deep down, beneath laws and customs, there's a truth we all know. And that truth, he believed, came from God. But even if it doesn't, even if morality is human, not holy, that doesn't mean it's empty. It means it's ours to protect, ours to wrestle with, ours to live. Because whether you believe in divine command or moral reason, the question at the end of the day isn't what does God say? It's, what will you do? It's late now. You're lying in bed, your ceiling fan murmuring above you, shadows dancing across the room like they've got nowhere else to be. You scroll a few more times, then set the phone down. No more distractions. Just you, a dark room, and one last quiet question. What if there's no God, and you still feel the must?
No lightning bolts.
No stone tablets.
No burning bushes.
Just that same voice inside that says, do right. Don't hurt them. Tell the truth. Where does that come from? Some say it's consciousness itself, that when your mind becomes self-aware, when you understand that others can suffer like you do, moral obligation naturally follows. That being aware is enough to create the ought. Others say no, that obligation doesn't arise from facts. You can know someone's in pain and still walk away. You can see the truth and still choose silence. So what makes you stay? What makes you care? Philosopher Derek Parfit offered a secular hope. That moral truths emerge from rational reflection, that they're the necessary principles for any ethical system to hold together. You recognize them not because God whispers them into your soul, but because they're the only way to live without contradiction. But then again, logic doesn't always get you out of bed to help someone at 2 a.m. Sometimes the pull is deeper. It isn't reason. It isn't instinct. It's presence. That strange, warm weight of knowing this is right. That moral click when your action aligns with something bigger than yourself, even if you can't name what that is. Maybe it's God, maybe not. But either way, you keep hearing it. Not as a command, but as an echo. Not as thunder, but as a whisper woven into the architecture of being. Historians still argue whether morality emerged before religion or vice versa. Did early humans sense right and wrong on their own, or only after inventing gods to enforce the rules? We don't know. But we do know that even in the most isolated tribes, moral norms appear. Don't kill without reason. Don't steal from your neighbor. Help your kin. Care for the weak. These patterns arise everywhere. They vary, sure, but they rhyme. And they suggest that maybe morality isn't a divine revelation, or just a useful trick. Maybe it's a feature of existence. You've probably had that moment, sitting by a hospital bed, or holding someone's hand at a funeral, or standing quietly while someone breaks. You don't think, what's the efficient thing to do? You just know what love looks like, and that knowledge carries weight. So now, lying here in the hush of night, you face one last crossroads. If you no longer believe in a divine enforcer, if you think the universe is silent, indifferent, unfeeling, can moral truths still bind you? The atheist says yes. That meaning isn't less meaningful just because you made it. That obligation is real because people matter, because pain is real, because empathy exists, and because the kind of person you become is your answer to the question of life itself. The believer says, no, meaning can't come from meat and synapses. If morality is real, it must come from the real. And the voice you keep hearing, that's not your mind. That's God, nudging you gently toward Him. You close your eyes, and maybe, just maybe, both are right. Maybe God doesn't stand outside your story, shouting commands. Maybe the divine lives inside your choosing, every time you say yes to goodness without needing a reason. You think of all those quiet, untelevised acts of kindness you've seen. The friend who stayed up, the stranger who paid, the apology that came years late but came anyway. You think of your own failures, your regrets, the times you looked away, or walked past, or said nothing when something needed saying. And you still care. That's the miracle, maybe. Not that you always get it right, but that you still want to. That the must never really leaves. That even in the absence of answers, you still ask the question. And so the debate goes on, not between atheists and believers, but inside you. The part that wants certainty. The part that makes peace with mystery. Because maybe the real point of morality isn't to prove God exists. Maybe it's to prove that you do, that your choices matter, that your life, your story, your small flame in the darkness can mean something, even if no one writes it down, even if no one watches, even if the stars never blink. You pull the blanket up, the fan hums, and the silence isn't so silent anymore. You hear it again, that old, familiar whisper, do good, be kind, stay human. The room softens now. The questions, the arguments, the long wandering trails of thought, they ease into stillness. Your heartbeat slows, and your body begins to drift with it, floating gently toward rest. Whatever your beliefs, whatever side you lean toward tonight, know this, you've taken the time to care, to think deeply, to turn the world's noisiest question over in your palms like a smooth stone. That alone is rare, and it means more than you realize. Let go now of the need for answers. Let the mystery be soft and unthreatening. Let your mind curl inward like a cat in a warm sunbeam. You don't need to solve morality tonight. You don't need to prove your goodness or justify your kindness. You're already enough. The night holds you, quiet and unjudging. Outside, a distant car hums by. A dog stirs. Somewhere far away, another light goes out. And closer to home, your eyes grow heavy. You are safe. You are still. And you are good. Not because someone told you. Not because the universe demands it. But because in the quiet of your own conscience, something shines. So breathe, sink, and sleep. We'll pick up the questions again another night.